Breathe, said the wind. How can I breathe at a time like this when the air is full of the smoke of burning tires, burning lives? Just breathe, the wind insisted. Easy for you to say, if the weight of injustice is not wrapped around your throat, cutting off all air. I need you to breathe. I need you to breathe. Don't tell me to be calm when there are so many reasons to be angry, so much cause for despair. I didn't say to be calm, said the wind. I said to breathe. We're going to need a lot of air to make this hurricane together. Lininger. We are halfway through the Revolutionary Love Conference. Are you all breathing? Because today marks 100 days. 100 days into this administration, and here's what the midwife says. She doesn't say breathe once and push the rest of the way. She says breathe, and then breathe, and then. So this means that this is teaching us how to build the movement. We are pausing now, 100 days in, to breathe before we push again, but remember, we'll need to breathe soon again. Take stock, come together, build our movement, grounded in love. Since we have hit the halfway point, I want to take a moment to give you a roadmap of where we have been and where we are going. We began this conference with framing revolutionary love as the call of our times. We asked, where are we? What is needed now? How do we build a love army? And then we offered you our thesis at the Revolutionary Love Project, that love requires 3 kinds of love in order to be revolutionary. Love for others, love for opponents, and love for ourselves. We offered you our thesis that love is not just a feeling, love is a commitment to extend our will for the flourishing of others, opponents, and ourselves. This definition is drawn from Bell Hooks and Erich Fromm. Now notice this is a reversal of how we talk about love in this country. We talk about love as a feeling first, followed by commitment and action. We're reversing that. Love as a public ethic is a commitment first, followed by feeling, because that means the feeling can wax and wane, but you're still walking the path of love as an orientation to the world. Any of you in a long-term marriage know that the feeling waxes and wanes. With your children, raising them, 2 years old, toilet paper all over the house, feeling waxes and wanes. But the commitment is there to extend my will for your flourishing. How do we do that? We have to ask the question. 3 questions in our heart. Who are you? What is at stake for you? What is my role in your flourishing? What is your role in mine? Who are you? What is at stake for you? What is my role in your flourishing? What is your role in mine? We ask these questions of our parents, of our brothers and sisters, of our husbands and wives, of our partners, of our children. What we're challenging us to do in this moment is to ask those questions to others who do not look like us, to opponents who disagree with us or even hurt us, and to ask this question of ourselves. Who am I? What is at stake for me? What is my role in my own flourishing? That's what it means to love ourselves in this movement. We need all 3 kinds of love for love to be revolutionary, because if we love just our opponents and not others and ourselves, that's self-loathing. If we love ourselves and not others and opponents, well, that's escapism, that's narcissism. That's where a lot of our self-help industry lives right now. And if we love others and not our opponents and ourselves, that is ineffective. This is where our movement exists right now. Our resistance is all focused on building the foundation of solidarity, standing with Black, Latino, trans, LGBT, Muslim, Sikh, Indigenous, expanding, and we need to build that foundation. But we are so focused on our marches and our vigils and our protests that we're not noticing in what ways we are starting to mirror the same fear and hate and vitriol that we are resisting. We don't yet know how to love our opponents. We don't yet know how to love ourselves enough to sustain ourselves in the struggle. That's why we're breathing now. That's why we need to breathe together. Session 3, this was yesterday. Hearing the call to love the neighbor was a talk about the theory of loving the neighbor, of loving others. Session 4 was about how to put that theory into practice, tools and tactics. That's what we had this morning. Then we moved on to revolutionary love for opponents, 2 panels. Session 5 was about confronting our opponents. What are the ethics of confronting our opponents? What is the theory that calls us to confront our opponents with love? That's what we just had. And this panel, this is a large task for us, but luckily these are my brothers and sisters. I know they're up for it. Confronting our opponents, what are the tools and tactics required to put that into practice? After this, we'll be moving into loving ourselves. The theory behind loving ourselves, session 7, and session 8 is the tools and tactics to love ourselves as part of the revolution. You all know where we are? Yes. We can take that Prezi down now. Thank you, sir. My time now begins. That was my host, and now I'm moving into offering. I'm going to begin with a prayer from my faith. Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves. Just a few blocks away from here, in the financial district of New York City in the year 2004, I was arrested. I was standing on the street corner holding my film camera to film a protest of the Republican National Convention, wearing a green badge that said legal observer. I was there to protect against police brutality. The NYPD came in with force. They knocked people down, they bloodied people up, and they turned to me, this brown girl who had nothing to protect her but a single badge, and within a moment I heard, NYPD, you are under arrest. I felt my hands taken behind my back. I heard my camera shatter into 1,000 pieces on the sidewalk. And I felt my body thrust against a wall. And as I slumped to the ground, I thought, it's okay. I've been arrested before. I know what civil disobedience looks like. I wasn't planning on it, but I can do this. Until I began to lose feeling in my hands. We were shoved into vans and taken to a makeshift detention center nicknamed Guantanamo on the Hudson. There were cages inside this detention center with barbed wire at the top and diesel on the ground. And by the time we were shoved into Guantanamo on the Hudson, I realized that I'd lost feeling in my hands. I turned to the lieutenant, bespectacled white man, and I said, "Sir, could you please loosen my cuffs, please?" He said, "We're not here to make you comfortable," and he came behind me, and in order to make an example out of me in front of all of the others, he twisted my arm. The experience of it was as if someone had cut my hands from my body. I opened my mouth to scream, the world went black, and all I could hear to keep me alive in that moment was the prayer from my ancestors. The women Police officers panicked, loosened, took off my cuffs, led me behind bars, and there I lay for 16 hours staring at the bars with my dead hand on my chest. My first thought when I came to, I am a person of privilege. I am a citizen. I go to an Ivy League school. I am educated. I speak English. My family has been in this country for a century. And I could taste brutality like this. What happens to all of the people who do not have these privileges? What happens behind the closed doors of prisons across this country every single day? The thought was so overwhelming that my only response was, I need to go to law school. But institutions of power can't be beat that easily. You see, when I was released, the trauma in my body worsened and deepened and spread. It turned into a chronic pain condition, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I was ashamed of it. I wasn't telling people about it. I didn't know how to reach out for therapy. Therapy isn't a thing in our community. And so I buried myself in books. I was reading Hegel and Heidegger and Kant as if they were going to heal me. I deferred law school for 3 years because the pain got so bad that I couldn't lift my hand to hold a microphone. These hands that hold cameras, that hold mics, that write, I could no longer use my hands. You see, what state violence does is not only break bodies, it breaks the human spirit. I have been taught to be ashamed of my rage as a woman and as a woman of color, and so I did not let rage in. And as long as I was suppressing that rage, trauma spread through me. Pain spread through me, coursed through me like a red-hot iron. It wasn't Hegel and Heidegger and Kant who helped me, it was Rumi. Rumi, who speaks of the human body as a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a depression, a meanness, welcome and entertain them all, he says, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door and invite them in. Be grateful for who comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Be grateful for my pain? I learned that as long as I was suffocating my rage and my pain, it was going to eat me alive. I learned the first tool for revolutionary love for opponents. Tool number 1 is to hold your hurt. Hold your hurt. Do not be ashamed of your hurt. Honor your hurt. Honor your pain as if it is a guest in your house, because it is there to teach you something. My pain taught me that my moral outrage was not something to be ashamed of, to cast aside, that we as people of color, as women of color, need to own our rage. There is the role of anger in revolutionary love. Anger is a guest, come to teach us that the institutions of power that we have inherited require us to be angry about them, because their brutality breaks bodies and spirits. And so I finally began to hold my anger. I finally began to sense my pain. And sensing the pain in the body and the trauma in the mind requires you to give language to it. But we can't hold our hurt in isolation, because that is when it corrodes into hate. And so tool number two is to let love in. let love in. I finally gave voice to how much help I needed. And my now husband, he took me in, and we lived in a tiny place by the Pacific Ocean, and he would cut my meal with a fork and knife and feed me. He would wash my hair because I couldn't lift my hand above my head. He showed me that love is not a feeling, love is a commitment, love is action first. I remember sitting at the ocean and closing my eyes and imagining the water and the air and the wind and the sun cradling my body, my muscles, my flesh, my bones. And I started to let the love of the universe in. And then I found my healer. I found a neuromuscular therapist named Joyce Frazier. Where are you, Joyce? Lying on Joyce's table, receiving her body work as love. I saw my body on her table as a brown, frail, broken, weak body. And I said, Joyce, help me heal this weak body. And she said, I will help you heal, but first you have to understand that this is not the body of a broken, brown, frail, weak woman. This is the body of a warrior. I feel warrior blood in you. You help me see myself in a way that I couldn't see. I couldn't see until I let your love in. That's what it means to hold trauma. That's what it means to heal, because then eventually you're able to release it. It does its work on you. That work took me 10 years. But because of your love, Joyce, I became strong enough to go to law school. I went to Yale Law School. And the first big assignment I was sent on, my law professor sent me to report on the military commissions at the real Guantanamo. I arrived at Guantanamo Bay, and what you don't understand about Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, is it is beautiful. Pristine beaches, rolling green hills, a bright blue sky, and you make your way across the ferry into this town, this military base, and it feels like Main Street. It feels like Disneyland. There's a tennis court. There's a paintball center. There's a Starbucks. There's a McDonald's. There's an Irish pub. And just over the hill, a detention center where they hold brown bodies, brown like mine, languishing for years without charge, without trial. I wasn't allowed over at the detention center. I was only surrounded by soldiers that I could not look in the eye, because every time I looked them in the eye, I saw the police officer who hurt me. I was sitting in the courtroom waiting to watch the trial, the hearing, the military commission's hearing for Omar Khadr, the young Canadian who was caught on the battlefield in Afghanistan at 15 years old, brought to Guantanamo, who had just turned 23. He had come of age in Guantanamo. And as he was led in, it struck me just how young he was. And then I began to look on either side of him, these soldiers who I couldn't look in the eye before, these soldiers who were telling me that they were the captives here, that they didn't have freedom, that the prisoners had more freedom than they did, that they were the real prisoners, soldiers whose stories I could not bear to hear. I looked at them and I suddenly saw that they were young too. They were 18. They were 19, they were 20, and I looked at myself. I was so young. All of us, the prisoner, the soldiers, the student called to bear witness, all of us were children when September 11th happened. None of us created Guantanamo, but we have been called to inherit Guantanamo. We were called to preserve a Guantanamo, a system not of our own making, and made to participate in it, made to perpetuate it, whether as prisoners or guards or witnesses. We have inherited multiple Guantanamos, systems not of our own making. And I understood that those soldiers whose stories I could barely make myself hear, were telling their truth. They were trapped too. They were trapped in a system that forced them to dehumanize the ones on the other side of the cell. And they could feel it weighing on their spirit. I've come to understand that this is how power works. It captures generations, imprisons all of us, those on the other side of the bars and those inside the cells. Our suffering is not the same. Let me be clear, it is not the same. But true liberation is liberating all of us. So that was tool number 3, liberate all. I left Guantanamo and I came back to my law school in Connecticut, and I realized that there was a supermax prison just a few miles away that held people in conditions of solitary confinement that rivaled the conditions we saw at Guantanamo. I understood that just as we have hidden Guantanamo away, created a legal black hole where our systems of rights and recognitions would not apply to those held in those cells, so too have we hidden people away behind our strip malls and suburbs and palm trees on this soil. You see, Guantanamo is not an anomaly. Guantanamo that is still open today. Guantanamo is only possible because of a culture that relies on a system of mass incarceration of black and brown bodies on US soil. And so how do we fight that? What does it mean to liberate all? I knew that the only way that I could challenge Northern Correctional Facility, the Supermax prison of Connecticut, every state has one Supermax prison, was if I was brave enough to hear not only the stories of the prisoners and their families, but the stories of the correctional officers too. And so a band of Yale Law students, I brought them together and we led a year-long investigation into this Supermax prison. And we sat with the prisoners and we sat with their mothers and fathers and then we sat with the correctional officers. And I heard their stories, and they talked about the high suicide rates, the high alcoholism rates, the high depression rates, what it felt like for them to cross into a combat zone each and every day. And I knew their suffering was not the same as these prisoners, 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, made to go crazy in these conditions of solitary confinement. Who are we as a country? No one is sentenced to solitary. You can be a nonviolent offender in general population and act up, and then you are sent to solitary with no clear, accessible way out. We call them the worst of the worst, just like we call those held at Guantanamo the worst of the worst, right? Our laws, our recognition, our dignity should not apply to them, but if we draw close enough to hear their story, we understand what has been made invisible up till now. Stories of prisoners, stories of mothers and fathers, and the stories of correctional officers. We made a film called The Worst of the Worst. We released this film alongside a legal report by lawyers, and it emptied out the prison. The Department of Corrections understood that solitary confinement was harming every single person walking through those doors. 400 people were held at Northern Correctional Facility. That number dwindled down to 24. All across the country, people are trying to figure out how to challenge prisons, how to fight for prison reform. We were able to do it. We were able to do it because we held up a moral vision that liberated all. I know some of you have been hearing me talk about love and are wondering, love is soft, She must be talking about love because she doesn't know the structures of injustice we are up against. I'm talking about love because it is the only thing I have ever seen create change in communities I have served. I'm talking about love, revolutionary love, because it is the only thing that will change the conditions that gave rise to the political crisis we are in. I am less interested in unseating this president and more interested in changing the conditions that gave rise to this presidency. I know this love is hard. I know a lot of you are hurting right now. But I invite you to think about these 3 tools. Hold your hurt. Hold your rage, your sorrow, your pain. Hold it. But don't hold it alone. Let love in. Hold your pain in community, a community that is committed to walking the path of love. And if you hold your pain in community, you will find a way to liberate all. Hold your pain. Let love in. Liberate all. You don't have to do all of these things at once because we are part of a movement. Some of us need to be the ones holding the hurt. If you are a person of color in harm's way right now, your job is to hold your hurt, to give it language, to honor it, but not to hold it in isolation. If you are a good ally right now, you know what you need to do is let love out so that others can let love in. And some of you are going to be tasked to design the moral vision and the policy solutions and the political tactics and the organizing to liberate all. Yes, even those who voted against us and their own interest. Because the only way we will birth a new future is if all of us are doing this together through the ethic of love. Thank you. Revolutionary love.